I'm the co-VP of Global Entrepreneurship alongside Anuheo, who just spoke a few moments ago. And we're so glad that you guys are here with us for this panel. So not to delay any further, but starting us off will be a fireside keynote on inclusive economic models, perspectives from China and Europe. At a moment where we see soaring poverty rates, a devastating economic crisis, and a concentration of wealth, it's a conversation that must be had, not only for the sake of economic equality, but also gender and racial equality. As our speakers talk, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and in the Q&A section and participate in the chat. Yanis Varoufakis is an economist and the former finance minister of Greece. He is also the founder of Democracy in Europe Movement 2025, a pan-European movement of Democrats dedicated to reshaping the EU towards a shared prosperity. Siddharth Chatterjee is the current resident coordinator of UN China and the former resident coordinator of UN Kenya. So we'll start today with opening statements for about 5 to 7 minutes from both Sid and Yanis each about what they view as an inclusive economic model of the future. And then we'll move to open discussion and Q&A. And Sid and Yanis, please feel free to engage with and challenge each other. This is an open dialogue. Sid, if you would like to start.
Well, thank you very much, Lucas, and Radhika, great to have to join you, and lovely to see you again. And Yanis, an honor. You know, you're quite a star here in China too. Let me tell you, and you're much appreciated because of your unconventional economic wisdom, which is what we need at this time and date. And we have to kind of veer ourselves away from the old Thatcherite Reagan economics to a completely new reality. So let me just perhaps start with a context. And inclusive economics is a concept that is still evolving. It brings a paradigm shift in economics from self-interest as the primary motivation to shared interests. Now, this shift stimulates investment in human well-being, social justice, creating real opportunities for the poor and ensuring environmental sustainability are of growing public interest. Now, at the UN, we view sustainable development as the harmonization of economic growth, social inclusion, environmental protection, in order to raise living standards. Now, inclusive development starts placing greater emphasis on the poorest, on the most marginalized, on the most left behind. And these are dimensions to inequality and poverty than income. For example, differences in access to health services, the basic infrastructure and legal systems, different education levels, people's ability to participate in decision-making. We cannot achieve sustainable development and make the planet a better place for all people if there are people that are excluded from the chance of a better life. Now, all meanings of globalization suggest that some relationship to inequality, at least in terms of heightening it. The costs and benefits of globalization are not equally shared amongst countries. As the ILO points out, that wealthier countries exploited and benefits of globalization as they possess the strong initial economic base, abundance of capital and skill, and technological leadership. The United Nations also recognizes that the impacts of minimum wages, layoffs, discrimination against certain groups, migrations have severely deepened inequality. And women are arguably the worst affected when labor regulations are mitigated, such as when paid maternity leave and holiday entitlements are removed, and when unpaid work and care from the government is held back. But there are reasons for optimism. Now, widespread recognition of significance of the problem, multilateral contribution towards the form of leaving no one behind, the SDGs, etc., the private sector fully sensitized on the topic, starting with the growing momentum for sustainability and including in its social dimensions. Now, tackling inequality is not a new commitment. In 2015, all United Nations member states pledged to reduce inequality within and among countries as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. Huge strides in reducing economic or extreme poverty have been achieved. And in China, for example, has lifted over 750 million people out of extreme poverty over the last decade, and close to 90 million over the last 7 years, a significant milestone towards reducing those inequalities and getting people out of desperate and abject poverty. Now in Kenya, where I have served, I have witnessed firsthand the significance of the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, if implemented to its fullest, it has the potential of lifting over 7 million people out of extreme poverty, 32 million out of moderate poverty, and this is the figures from the World Bank. Now, efforts here are the game changer that needs to be enhanced. Now, according to McKinsey's report, COVID-19 has accelerated digital transformation by 7 years by reshaping digital learning, digitalization of education, creating a better virtual learning environment. Post-pandemic education will not only drive strong economic growth, but also social inclusion and reducing of inequality. Colleagues, the entire world is undergoing and emerging out of the COVID-19 pandemic. The crisis against inequality helps build solidarity and unity among society and populations, engages communities, and raises critical questions to the world we live in with the help of to build back better from the pandemic in hope for a future of shared prosperity. Now, a strong message from the United Nations Secretary General on the occasion of the World Earth Day yesterday. He said that as the world moves towards clean air and renewable energy, it is essential that we ensure a transition. Workers in impacted industries and the informal sector must be supported as they have jobs or they reskill. We must also unleash the vast power of women and girls to drive transformation, including as equal participants in governance and decision making. Therefore, ending inequality requires transformative change, and governments must promote inclusive social economic growth and eliminate discriminatory laws, policies, and practices to ensure equal opportunities and reduce inequalities. Therefore, a people-centered approach is absolutely essential to ensure that we leave no one behind. So with that, I would just conclude by saying that today what I witness in China is part magic, part economics, and part politics that is allowing a transformation to take place. When I look at the spirit of China, when I come across people on the road, there is a level of optimism which surprises me. And perhaps if this is a model that could actually help steer a continent, a country which is 1.4 billion people with a sense of optimism, I believe an opportunity for shared prosperity is there, but which also means, Yanis and colleagues, a renewal in the faith of multilateralism, but above all to address a major deficit, and that is a trust deficit. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sid, for that opening statement. Yanis, if you would like to make yours.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Sid, for the opening remarks. They make my life easier in not having to repeat a lot of what you said. Allow me to focus in the 5-6 minutes that I have on 3 different planks of the argument. The first one, a comment on the North Atlantic, the European Union and the United States. Secondly, a few words on China. And thirdly, the world. I begin with the European Union and the United States, the North Atlantic, that crashed and burned in 2008, or at least whose financial sectors created such huge problems for the world and for our peoples around Europe and North America. Since the title of our meeting today has to do with an inclusive model, which I suspect means a model of sustainable development that is also socially just. Well, the European Union and the United States is precisely the opposite. It is the kind of model you do not want if you care about inclusive development. And let me be frank, because we don't have that much time, and I think our capacity to tolerate the idiocy which is unfolding in the North Atlantic is severely circumscribed by what's going on. Think of what's happening as we speak, or for the last 12 years, turbocharged by the pandemic. The European Central Bank, I'm speaking here from a Eurozone perspective, I'm calling it from Greece. The European Central Bank prints or generates hundreds of billions of euros to sustain the European economy. That's not a bad thing. It's just a fact, right? 1.7 trillion since March 2020, around 6.5, 7 trillion since the 1st of March 2015. Okay, so this money is being generated. Now, where does it go? It goes to commercial banks at negative interest rates. So commercial banks effectively are being paid by the state, by the central bank, in order to take this money and lend it, because that's what a banker does. A banker must lend the money that they're given by the central bank, otherwise there is no profit. Who do they give it to? They don't give it to the little people out there. They do not give it to the medium-sized companies, the small companies. They do not push it into education, into health. Why? Because they look at the little people out there and they say, they won't be able to repay me because of the overall recession. So what they do is they pick up the phone, they call their mates in the corporate sector. So, Deutsche Bank, Societe Generale, Santander, the large banks, Barclays Bank and so on, they pick up the phone and they call Siemens, Volkswagen, Alstom, Google, Facebook, and they say, I've got a few billion here. I'm prepared to give it to you for 0 interest rates. Will you take it? Because 0 interest rates, when they borrow it from the central bank at negative interest rates, there is still arbitrage to be made by the banks. Okay? Now, those corporations, please note that. This is crucial. It just goes to show what weird and strange times we live in. They have a stash of cash, billions and billions of cash saved. Corporations are not meant to save. Households are meant to save, and corporations are meant to borrow in order to invest. Anyway, so just as a sign of the crisis that we face in the North Atlantic, they have a lot of savings. So when their banker calls and says, I've got a few billion for free, do you want it? They say, yeah, okay, give it to me. But they're not going to invest it, because if they wanted to invest, they would have invested their own savings. So you know what they do? They go to the stock exchange. Siemens goes to the stock exchange, and with central bank money, they buy back Siemens shares, whose price, of course, goes up. The board of directors, whose salaries are linked to the share price, goes up. They go out there and buy nice houses in Berlin, in Paris, in Rome, in Athens, wherever. Those house prices go up. That creates more inequality. The little people are facing higher rents, lower incomes, no investment, no good quality jobs. You want to talk about inequality? This is the triumphant march of inequality as a result of a broken, financialized capitalist system. This is what happens in the European Union, and this is what happens in the United States. Very quickly, let's go to China. I don't have time to say much, except for one thing, that without China intervening in 2008, 2009 to boost remorselessly its level of investment to unprecedented highs, the United States and German economies would have died. The United States and the German economies were saved in 2008, 2009 by 2 factors, by 2 institutions: the Federal Reserve, that printed all the money, and China, that boosted investment. But this huge boost in investment means that the wage share of Chinese GDP is shrinking. So the people of China, right, even though Sid is right, they are far more optimistic than the people of Europe or the people of the United States. Nevertheless, they are receiving a very small percentage of the pie. And that necessarily means that the trade war between the United States and China becomes effectively a class war, in the sense that both the working class of the United States and the working class of China, as a result of the way globalization works, are constantly shortchanged. They constantly have fewer and fewer opportunities to invest in the future of their children, while our countries are engaging more and more in geopolitical tensions, and inequality is growing everywhere. Now, that is not a rational way of running our affairs. If you add to that the fact that since 2008, if you take China, the United States, and the European Union, never before have we had such huge savings globally in the history of capitalism. And yet, if you compare that to the overall amount of investment in the things that we need, like green energy, green agriculture, public health, public education, never before have we had such low investment relative to the amount of liquidity and savings that we have. So it is clear to me that we do not have a sustainable model. The European Union, I think, wins the gold medal of unsustainability financially. The United States wins the gold medal of unsustainability environmentally and politically. And China is struggling to change its own internal distribution of income, which it cannot do in this globalized framework. So we do need a completely different model for the international social economy, one that will find a way of taking $10 trillion every year and putting it into investment in education, health, and green transition in the developing world.
Thank you so much for that. If you have any questions or comments for Yanis for Sid or Sid for Yanis, please feel free to chime in now. But if there are none, or are there? If there are none, then we can take a question from the audience. Somebody
maybe
said,
I'll just say that I'm a fan of Yanis, and you know, you don't have me differing with him, because I just think that the moment has come for a reshaping of the global economic model. The global economic model, I mean, this is what COVID did, was it struck us like a bolt of lightning. And in that flash, we suddenly saw the contours of inequality emerge. And the contours that emerged has been a big surprise. It has emerged in some of the most powerful economic giants in the world. And I think this is where we need to revisit, you know, and I'm glad that Stanford students are taking this initiative. We nearly need to revisit on the way we need to unleash this or spur the whole Agenda 2030 of Sustainable Development Goals. That is not going to happen from the pre-COVID model. We have to embrace a new reality, and that new reality will have to be about equity. Anyway, over to you, Lucas.
Yanis, if you have anything to say.
No, I think I've said more than enough, and Sid covers me completely. And I'm very keen to hear other people speak before I speak again.
Absolutely. We have a question from the chat, and they asked to Sid, do you think the concept of universal basic income will go a long way in improving the financial status of extremely poor people and help reduce income inequality, which has gradually increased due to the recession caused by COVID-19?
100% yes. And we've seen that with cash transfers in emergencies. And we've seen that when you actually have in disaster situation cash transfers, families tend to manage those incomes quite well. And I think when you start to address it in the bottom quintile of people who are absolutely in abject poverty, it actually starts to reduce the multidimensional nature of poverty. And I've seen this, you know, when you look at China, for example, what they did in the last 4 decades or in the last 7 years, I'm just talking about the 7 years where 90 million people were taken out of abject poverty, destitution, you know, it has a, you know, multiplier effect across their quality of life, you know, improved access to education and healthcare. Those are the very parameters which lead to better human capital. So I would fully support a basic income. In fact, you had a presidential candidate who also talked about a basic income. Regrettably, he didn't make it to the final list, but I wish, you know, that is a concept that we need to revisit and apply it from a global perspective. Over to you.
I'd like to come into this because I want to agree and add to this an important dimension. It depends on how you fund the UBI. I am completely against funding it through taxation. Completely against it, because, you know, when you go to a hardworking blue-collar worker in Ohio or in Shenzhen, and you say to them, you know, they're struggling to make ends meet, and you say to them, I'm going to take a chunk of your income and I'm going to use it to pay rich people or to pay, you know, people who don't want to work, you know, surfers in Bondi Beach, Sydney, right? Because that's what universal it means. It means you give it to everyone, even those who do not need it, even those who, you know, people think that they do not deserve it. When you say that, you create immediately a split in the working class. Those who are against it and those who are in favor of it, right? So I'm completely against it. You may then say, okay, so how do we fund it? Well, folks, we were talking about the money tree before. I was talking about it. They're printing the dough anyway. They're printing, you know, mountain ranges of cash, and they're giving it to the bankers. And the bankers give it to the corporations will go to the stock exchange, and the money is wasted. Now, if instead of that, imagine that, you know, you just give it as universal basic income. And it would be absolutely brilliant if we cut out the middleman utterly and outrightly. Who is the middleman? The banker. At the moment, you have the central bank, you have people. And in the middle, you have the commercial bank. The moment you place a commercial banker in between central bank money and the people, most of it is siphoned away and becomes toxic. So cut it out. Imagine a situation where the Federal Reserve in the United States, or the Bank of India, Central Bank of India, or or the European Central Bank, were to announce that every citizen, every resident, would get a free digital bank account with a central bank. This can be done like that. It's technically really very straightforward, and everybody gets web banking, a plastic card, an app on the phone to make payments, right? Now, the moment you do that, effectively, you have an Excel file, you have a spreadsheet that belongs to the central bank, and each person, each resident, has one row with different numbers. So when you buy a bicycle, when you buy a cup of coffee, some numbers migrate from one cell of the data sheet to another. So within the economy, within the national economy or the block economy, all right? So, well, in that case, it's really very simple. On this spreadsheet, you just add a few numbers every month to every cell. That's a universal basic income. And the money circulates within, and to the extent that there's any slack in excess supply in the economy, that eliminates it. So you have supporting people, supporting the economy, no inflation. You can adjust how much the UBI is, and you cut out all this toxic waste and the inequality producing process, which is presided over by the commercial banker. Now, the Chinese central bank has been the first one off the blocks experimenting with the digital renminbi. That's what it means. When you hear digital currency, I mean, all currencies are digital. I mean, today, all payments are digital. What does a digital currency really mean? It means that you cut out the commercial bank. So by going in that direction, I think that China is the country that, I don't know whether they have the political will to do it, but it would be the obvious thing to do with a digital renminbi currency, to create a UBI that is simply funded by the central bank. And that is the way to lift the consumption levels and living standards of the Chinese working class. And that could be a real game changer internationally, because it will be very difficult for the United States and the European Union to pretend that business can continue as usual.
Thank you so much for those comments, both of you. As closing remarks or closing question, Yanis, you wrote in an article a while back that emergencies tend to reveal our true priorities. When our house is burning down or the storm waters are flooding in, we hold on to what we value most and leave the rest behind. So to both of you, and we can start with Sid first, in the wake of the pandemic, what have we held on to and what have we left behind? You're muted, by the way, Sid.
The pandemic descended on us like a rain on a rooftop. And suddenly we realized, we thought that the roof was robust. And then we found the leaks that came through those roofs. And I think what this pandemic has taught out is the primacy of universal health coverage, which often got ignored over time. And across the world, where you thought that the world had amongst the most advanced health systems, those are the very health systems that turned belly up. So when I look at the Sustainable Development Goals and our race to the 2030 agenda, I think the world has to renew a pledge and come together and renew multilateralism, address the trust deficit, and focus towards universal health coverage. There was a Greek philosopher by the name of Herophilus in 265 BC. And Herophilus was then the wise man that reminded us that without health, we have no strength or intellect or wisdom, or no wealth. And that perhaps is a renewal of what Herophilus looked at. And maybe this is that moment to go towards universal health coverage in its real sense, because who knows what the next pandemic may look like. Back to you.
Absolutely. Yanis, what are your thoughts?
I'll have to repay the compliment to Sid by mentioning my favorite author, who happens to be Indian, Arundhati Roy, who said that at this moment, what we have a moral duty to do and a political duty to do is to look at the pandemic as a portal that we have an opportunity to cross into or over and move beyond a model of the world which wastes human resources and sets one proud nation against the other. A portal that if we cross by taking as little with us as possible of the baggage of the past and have a determination to think things afresh in the spirit of international solidarity, that will be a wonderful opportunity to make use of an awful pandemic for good use.
And I think we can take one more question as we're waiting for our next panelist to come along. So to both of you are very deeply involved now and historically with the transformation of transnational organizations, the EU and the UN. And Yanis, we can start with you. What do you think is the role of transnational organizations in promoting an inclusive and sustainable economy for the future?
They're everything. Unfortunately, we don't have them. The United Nations is extremely weak. The European Union is very fast moving in the wrong direction. The International Monetary Fund sings a better tune, but acts in the same old ways. The World Bank has become a kind of bailiff for international oligarchs. So we need to rebuild, we need to transform. We cannot reform these institutions. We need to transform them. And we need to transform them in order to tackle internationally problems that are international. Like climate change cannot be tackled by any single country. Public debt cannot be tackled by any single country. Private debt cannot be tackled. Pandemics cannot be tackled by individual countries. So your generation, I mean, my generation and Sid's generation, we failed. We're abysmal, dismal, horrible failures. We have to hang our heads in shame and just make our way to our grave. Your generation is the one that has to make sure that you create, with a new spirit of determination, international institutions from scratch that can tackle these global issues, species-wide issues, at the level of international solidarity.
Thank you.
You know, Lucas, you all are sitting where the Charter of the United Nations was signed in 1945. And the vision of Harry Truman was precisely that as an organization, when the United Nations was given birth, we do not fail. At least one place we've perhaps come together on is we've not had a third world war. But at the same time, we've also seen 75 million people who've been displaced as a result of conflict, localized conflicts, or the environment, etc. I think what COVID-19 has done is forced us into a renaissance moment. And I think we are all lucky to serve a Secretary General in the UN who really believes that the UN has to be repositioned. That is why he's pushing the UN reforms. And let me tell you, it's not easy for him. There's a lot of pushback against those reforms. But unless we see that renaissance happen, precisely the kind of renaissance we saw in the 15th century, which was actually led by a German by the name of Martin Luther, you know, who made sure that the Catholic faith had to change in order to adapt to a new reality. Perhaps that is the moment for multilateral organizations like the United Nations too. So, you know, I have faith in the future because I've worked with the UN at the grassroots and I've seen the difference it can actually make, whether it is demobilizing child soldiers in South Sudan or working with remote communities in Northern Kenya. I've seen what it can do. But the point is our relevance in this new situated environment. And therefore, for me, it's a privilege serving in a country which really believes that the spirit of multilateralism needs to be rekindled. It's a constant message which is coming out from China, and I'm proud to be part of that journey. Back to you.
Thank you both so much for coming today. It's been a pleasure. We loved having you guys both here.
Thank you, Lucas. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you
so much.
Good to meet you.
Thank you, Yanis. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Lucas, I'm going to have you help Dite. Sid, can you stay on for a second? I have Sid, stay a second if you can.
I'm here. I'm going to stay for more than a couple of seconds. You just tell me
Wonderful.
when to go.
I have a question. Lucas, if you could help Dite, and I'll take over and have a question for Sid until you get around here. Sorry, everyone, we're having some technical challenges getting speakers on, and Lucas, who's moderating, is our also tech guru here. So Sid, tell us a bit about your vision for our world right now, kind of coming out of this dialogue, just at a broader level. What is it going to take to achieve the SDGs, and what is the role that we have so many young people from so many countries? Before you joined, we were seeing from pretty much every continent, almost every country we have participants. What is your message for the young people? What is it that they really can do and should be thinking of to achieve all the SDGs?
Yeah. So, thank you for that question, Radhika. And I'm just coming from the Boao Forum. The Boao Forum is a place, it's a small place in Hainan province of China. And the Boao Forum is like the World Economic Forum of Asia. And we had about 4,000 participants. There was no social distancing, hardly people wore masks, and everybody was completely confident that they would not fall sick. And I can confirm that China has played a pretty dramatic role in the way it's dealt its public health response. Why I'm giving you this is because that is where ideas came out. People were able, it allowed the free movement of ideas and a cross-pollination of ideas. So at the Boao Forum, the Secretary General of the Boao Forum, Ambassador Li Baodong, released the Boao report on the SDGs. And there are 4 deficits that are holding the SDGs back. Deficit number 1 is a health deficit. Deficit number 2 is an infrastructure deficit. Infrastructure in its entirety, not just BRI, but water systems and health systems and everything that accompanies it. The third is a green deficit. And that is why that is why the Secretary General reminded us that we are in a climate emergency. And yesterday, thanks to the leadership of President Biden, many heads of states came together, and the United States now really coming back to the Paris Agreement and pushing the climate agenda. And the fourth is a digital deficit. And I think what COVID did was it actually showed that a digital divide is actually leaving about 1 billion children out of access to educational opportunities. So I believe that these are 4 essential parameters that we would need to address in order to, it'll have a multiplier effect on the SDGs. But I'll go back to something very, very important, and that is a trust deficit that developed during the COVID period and even pre-COVID, where the entire international relations got very toxic, and that is having a ripple effect in many ways. I believe the young people can help rebuild that spirit of multilateralism, cross the generational divide where US students and Chinese students could come together and revisit the spirit of multilateralism. And I think this is where the trust will be real. And I hope that I would want to see Stanford's leadership in this space, because the voice of Stanford is a significant one, and I just hope that we would be able to bridge that through what I would call a think tank, which brings the US and brings Africa and brings China together and starts revisiting the way we start to operationalize the new way of doing business, particularly when it comes to accelerating the SDGs. And I think the talent pool is there in the US, in Africa, and in China. Just imagine if we could combine forces and make a difference in that direction. Back to you.
Thank you, Sid. That is so inspiring. And I also want to pull in a little bit into the dialogue. We'll be getting more deeper later in the panel, but Sid is one of the most inspiring leaders at the United Nations. Earlier, he used to head United Nations Kenya. We also have with us later speaking, and now on the call with us, Stephen Jackson, the new head of United Nations Kenya. And when Sid was there, we built some amazing bridge building between the Stanford community, Silicon Valley, and Silicon Savannah in Kenya, with some of the top companies in tech and the top minds across these continents coming together. Sid, can I request you to also take a couple of minutes on kind of that experiment we did and how that is a nice pilot for kind of what can happen across continents, across countries to collectively achieve the SDGs?
Well, I'll start with a quote from George Bernard Shaw when he said that, some men see things as they are and ask why, and some dream things that never was and ask why not. And I think what we were able to do in the Kenya US partnership was really revisit the way we could work together from a completely different perspective. But this needed leadership. And that's the leadership we got both from Kenya, right from the head of state to many of the ministers. But what they also had was partners who were in lockstep with that vision. And I think that becomes very important. So in order to achieve it, you need 3 Ps. The first P is very strong and robust political will. The second P is the right public policy that helps to shape this narrative and bring it all together. And the third is partnerships. And this partnerships is very unorthodox. It's about the private sector, academia like Stanford and Columbia and the Harvards and the Kenyatta University, and bringing that kind of academic scholarship, research, data. And the third in this partnership space is what you would term as the leapfrogging, where you combine big data technology and innovation. So I see this as the new ecosystem if we want to drive the new agenda. In fact, this will be the basis of the new form of multilaterals.
Thank you, Sid. I really appreciate you sharing some kind of broader perspectives beyond the